The wedding invitation arrived in a gold envelope, and my husband's name was printed on it as the groom. That line still burns in my memory like a paper cut that never heals. I remember holding the envelope in my trembling hands, the gold seal glinting under the afternoon sun that streamed through my kitchen window. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a coincidence maybe. There had to be another Daniel Brooks out there getting married. But when I saw the venue, the date, and the guest list, I realized this wasn't just a cruel joke. I was on the guest list, and it was for the weekend he was supposed to be on his business trip. I didn't cry right away. My body went still, like a deer caught in the silence before the gunshot. The hum of the refrigerator filled the air. I could hear the faint chirping of sparrows outside, the neighbor's lawnmower, the kettle hissing behind me. Life was carrying on ordinary, unbothered while mine had just split open. But let me go back, before the envelope arrived, before my world became a puzzle of lies and gold paper. Back to when I still believed in my husband's voice, his smile, and his stories about client meetings and conferences. Daniel and I had been married for 11 years. We met at a mutual friend's dinner party, back when I was still teaching literature at the community college and he worked in logistics for a small import company. He had this quiet confidence, the kind that didn't demand a room's attention but drew you in anyway. I fell for his calm steadiness, the way he always seemed to have a plan. Our life together was stable, predictable in a comforting way. Sunday breakfasts with burnt pancakes and too much syrup, weeknight routines where I'd grade papers at the dining table while he typed away on his laptop, spreadsheets glowing on his screen. We weren't perfect, but we were us, or so I thought. We lived in a modest 2-story home with pale green walls that I painted myself one summer when I decided our life needed a little more warmth. Daniel had laughed when I said that, but he helped anyway, rolling the paint on while music played low from the radio. He kissed the tip of my nose when I accidentally smudged paint on it. I can still smell that day the sharp scent of latex paint, the sound of rain tapping against the window, the feeling of being loved without question. We didn't have children, not for lack of trying. I had a miscarriage in our 3rd year of marriage, and after that the silence between us grew thicker. We both avoided the topic, pretending that time and busyness could fill the space where grief had made its home. Instead, I poured myself into teaching and writing short essays that I never published. Daniel poured himself into work, or so he said. Still, there were tender moments. His hand on mine as we watched movies, his voice calling me my girl even after a decade. I wanted to believe we were happy that we'd made it through the rough patches, that our love was enough. Then came the trip. He told me about it 3 weeks before it happened. He'd been unusually tense at dinner that night, pushing his food around his plate. When I asked what was wrong, he sighed and said, "It's just this new client, Claremont Exports. They want me to oversee negotiations in Denver. It's a big opportunity, Jen." I smiled, trying to hide the flicker of loneliness I felt. "That's great, honey. How long will you be gone?" "Just 4 days," he said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Thursday to Sunday. I'll be back before you know it." It sounded normal, perfectly normal. But there was something about the way he smiled, too quick, too rehearsed, that made my stomach twist, though I brushed it off as paranoia. After all, he'd never given me a reason not to trust him. That week, I threw myself into preparing for his trip like it was some kind of personal project. I ironed his shirts, packed his favorite cologne, and even slipped a small note into his suitcase. "Good luck, my love. Come home safe." I kissed him goodbye that Thursday morning, standing in the doorway as his car disappeared down the street. I remember feeling proud of him, proud of us. The kind of pride you feel when you think your love has endured all storms and come out stronger. But the house felt too quiet that night, too still. His absence didn't feel like temporary silence. It felt like a missing heartbeat. The next few days passed in small, lonely rituals. I made tea for one, ate dinner in front of the TV, checked my phone more often than I should have. Daniel texted a few times, meetings all day. "Miss you?" Once, he sent a blurry photo of what looked like a hotel room beige wall, standard decor. Nothing out of the ordinary. Until Saturday. That's when the gold envelope came. It was tucked among the mail, resting innocently between an electricity bill and a grocery store flyer. The paper shimmered faintly in the afternoon light. My name, Jennifer Brooks, was written in elegant script, no return address. I almost didn't open it, thinking it was some promotional wedding catalog. But when I did, the world seemed to tilt sideways. The invitation was thick, embossed, luxurious, the kind people spend too much money on to impress their guests. At the top, in flowing cursive, were the words, "The wedding of Daniel Brooks, F. Vanessa Hale." My heart stopped. I read the names again, and again. My husband's name. My husband's. And beneath it the date, Saturday, May 14th, the very day he was supposed to be in Denver. At the bottom, my own name appeared in the guest list along with our mutual friends, his co-workers, even his sister. I stared at it for a long time, my mind refusing to process it. Then the room began to spin. I had to sit down. That's when I noticed the venue, the Glass Orchid Banquet Hall, just 30 miles away. Not Denver, not even out of state. My husband wasn't on a business trip. He was getting married. I remember laughing then, not from amusement, but from the sheer absurdity of it. A sharp, broken sound that filled the kitchen until it dissolved into sobs. My note, the one I'd tucked into his suitcase with love, flashed in my mind. Come home safe. What a fool I'd been. I sat there for hours, the invitation lying open on the table beside my cold cup of tea. By the time night fell, my tears had dried, replaced by a strange, calm determination. I wasn't going to call him, not yet. I needed to understand. I needed to see for myself what kind of man could build a second life right under his wife's nose. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that invitation, the gold letters gleaming like they were mocking me. I could almost hear Daniel's voice in my head, that smooth, steady tone he used whenever he lied about small things, where he'd been, who he'd talked to, why he came home late. It was a tone I had once mistaken for calm honesty. I sat by the window until dawn, staring at the pale light stretching over our quiet street. The neighborhood was waking up, sprinklers ticking, a dog barking somewhere down the block, the faint scent of dew on the grass. I wondered if Vanessa Hale, whoever she was also awake, maybe excited, maybe nervous, getting ready to marry my husband. I should have felt anger, but what I felt first was confusion. Confusion that burned slowly into disbelief. How could a man kiss me goodbye one morning and promise to call from Denver, then stand under wedding arches 2 days later? When the sun finally rose, I made a decision. I wasn't going to call anyone. Not yet, not his sister, not my best friend, not even him. I would go to that wedding. I needed to see it with my own eyes. Not as a broken wife begging for answers, but as a woman standing in the ruins of her own story, trying to understand what burned it down. The next day, I drove to the address printed on the invitation, the Glass Orchid Banquet Hall. I told myself I was just going to look around to see if it was even real. But part of me already knew it was. The Glass Orchid was a stunning venue, tucked behind rows of maple trees on the edge of town. I'd driven past it before, an elegant place with tall windows and a garden full of white roses. It looked like something out of a magazine, the kind of place people chose for dream weddings. I parked across the street and sat there for a long time, the engine idling. Workers were unloading crates of flowers. A few men were setting up tables inside. I could see someone, a woman, standing near the entrance, talking to the coordinator. She was tall, graceful, with long auburn hair pulled into a sleek bun. Even from a distance, there was something commanding about her presence. I didn't know her name yet, but I would soon learn it was Vanessa. She turned slightly, and I saw the faint outline of a bridal gown beneath the garment bag she held. My stomach twisted. That was her, the woman marrying my husband. I rolled down the window slightly, needing air. The scent of roses and fresh paint drifted in. It made me dizzy. Part of me wanted to march right across the street, slap the invitation on the table, and demand answers. But the other part, the calmer, more calculating part, told me to wait, to watch. That night, I went home and opened Daniel's laptop. He never shared his passwords with me, but after 11 years of marriage, you learn patterns, birthdays, dates. The first one I tried, our wedding anniversary, didn't work. The second, his mother's birth year, didn't either. But the third one, it opened. His inbox looked clean. Too clean, almost like it had been scrubbed, but buried in the promotions tab, I found an email confirmation from a boutique in town, final fitting appointment, Vanessa Hale, accompanied by Daniel Brooks. The date was 2 weeks ago. My hands went cold. I scrolled further, faster. Hotel bookings, dinner reservations, a string of florist receipts, every detail carefully organized like he'd built an entire new life piece by piece, right in the cracks of our marriage. But what broke me most wasn't the emails. It was a single folder labeled Orchid. Inside were photos, a collection of engagement shots taken at a park I recognized instantly. Daniel in a suit, Vanessa in a flowing white dress, their hands intertwined, her head resting on his shoulder, the kind of smile he hadn't given me in years. I closed the laptop and sat there in silence, my heart beating like it wanted to break free from my chest. For the first time in my life, I didn't know what role I played anymore. Was I the wife? The outsider? The ghost of the woman he used to love? That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, something I rarely did, and walked through the rooms of our house. The walls I'd painted, the kitchen we'd remodeled together, the couch where we'd fallen asleep watching old movies. Everywhere I looked, there were traces of a life that had been quietly erased. I opened his closet and saw the empty space where his suit had been, the one I'd carefully packed for his trip. My note was probably still in his suitcase. I imagined him finding it that morning as he buttoned his shirt. Maybe he laughed, maybe he felt guilty, or maybe he didn't feel anything at all. I slept little that night. Every creak of the floor, every hum of the fridge felt amplified in the darkness. I kept asking myself, why invite me? Why include my name on the guest list? Was it arrogance? A mistake? Or some cruel way of announcing the end? By morning, I knew what I had to do. Saturday. The day of the wedding arrived, wrapped in soft sunlight. The kind of day poets write about. I dressed in a simple navy dress, not too bold, not too plain. I didn't want to be noticed, not yet. I just wanted to see. When I arrived, guests were already gathering. The parking lot shimmered with luxury cars. Laughter spilled from the garden as photographers darted around, capturing moments of joy. I felt like a ghost, moving among the living invisible, yet acutely aware of every detail. Inside, the hall was breathtaking. Chandeliers hung like frozen rain. The air smelled of lilies and champagne. A quartet played softly in the corner. I clutched my small purse tightly, my invitation folded neatly inside, as if holding proof of my pain gave it form. And then I saw him. Daniel stood near the altar, talking to one of the groomsmen. He looked polished, confident, the same suit I'd packed. His tie was new, his face freshly shaven. He was smiling, that same practiced smile that once made me feel safe. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My husband, my Daniel, looked like a stranger wearing his skin. I didn't confront him, not yet. I took a seat in the back, blending into the crowd. My hands were cold, trembling against the invitation. The ceremony was about to begin. When the music changed and everyone turned toward the entrance, I felt the air shift. The doors opened. Vanessa stepped in, radiant in her gown. She wasn't just beautiful, she was glowing, confident, untouched by guilt. Daniel's eyes found hers instantly. He smiled in a way I hadn't seen in years, the kind that spoke of promise and new beginnings. My throat tightened, my eyes blurred. Around me, people whispered admiration. I could barely hear the vows, only fragments: honor, truth, forever. Words that once bound me now sounded hollow. And then, as if by some cruel twist of fate, Daniel's gaze swept the room and landed on me. For a split second, everything stopped. His smile faltered. His hand, holding Vanessa's, tensed. I saw it, that flash of panic. Recognition, guilt. Our eyes met across the distance, and in that silence, 1,000 unspoken things screamed between us. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just held his gaze steady, calm, like the woman he once promised the world to. Then I stood up, and quietly, without a word, I walked out. Outside, the sunlight hit me like a slap. The laughter and music from inside drifted through the doors, muffled, almost distant. I stood on the steps of the glass orchid, clutching my purse, my pulse pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. For a moment I just stared at the parking lot, at the rows of cars glinting under the warm May sky. Everything felt unreal, the kind of moment where your body moves but your mind lags behind, still stuck somewhere inside the wreckage. I walked toward my car slowly, my heels clicking on the pavement. I could hear birds chirping in the trees, the faint hum of traffic down the road. Ordinary sounds. Life going on as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. When I reached my car door, I stopped. My hand hovered over the handle. I could have just left, driven away, vanished, let him live his lie, but something in me refused. After 11 years of loyalty, love, and blind trust, I wasn't going to fade quietly. I turned back toward the hall. Through the tall glass windows, I could see Daniel standing near the altar, frozen. Guests were whispering, glancing toward the door I'd just exited. The officiant looked confused. Vanessa leaned in, her brow furrowed, asking him something. He didn't answer. He just kept staring in my direction, pale and rigid, like he'd seen a ghost. And maybe, in a way, he had. I didn't go back inside. Instead, I found a quiet corner near the garden, close enough to hear the music, far enough to stay unseen. I sat on a stone bench beneath an oak tree, the breeze lifting strands of my hair. My heart was steady now, no longer panicked. Then the doors burst open. Daniel stepped outside, scanning the grounds. His eyes found me instantly. For a second, he just stood there, his mouth opening and closing, searching for words that would never come. Finally, he walked toward me, slow, cautious steps, like approaching a wild animal he wasn't sure would bite. "Jennifer," he whispered when he reached me. His voice cracked on my name. "What are you doing here?" I almost laughed. "What am I doing here?" As if I were the one trespassing on his life. I looked up at him, meeting his eyes. I could cue the same thing, I said quietly. "Though I suppose the answer's obvious now." He looked around nervously, lowering his voice. "You shouldn't have come." That stung. More than I expected. "I was invited," I said, holding up the gold-embossed invitation like evidence in a trial. "You made sure of that." He flinched, his jaw tightened. That was a mistake. "You weren't supposed to. Find out?" I cut in. My tone was calm, eerily calm. "You weren't supposed to get caught, Daniel." "Isn't that what you mean?" He ran a hand through his hair, the same way he always did when he was cornered. "It's complicated." "It usually is," I said softly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The wind rustled through the trees. I could hear laughter inside Vanessa's laughter echoing faintly through the glass doors. The sound twisted something deep inside me. "Who is she?" I asked finally. "How long?" He hesitated. That hesitation told me more than any words could. "Almost 2 years," he said quietly. 2 years. I blinked, trying to process it. 2 years? Daniel, that's most of our marriage since the miscarriage. He nodded once, eyes downcast. "It started after we lost the baby. You shut me out, Jen. You were grieving, I know, but..." I held up my hand sharply. "Don't you dare blame that for this." My voice trembled, but I kept it controlled. "I was broken, Daniel. We both were. But instead of healing with me, you went and built another life behind my back." He sighed, the weight of guilt written across his face. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. Vanessa, she helped me feel alive again. I thought I'd lost that. And me?" I whispered. "What did I make you feel?" He looked up then, his eyes full of something I couldn't quite name. "Regret, maybe, or cowardice. You made me feel safe, but safe started to feel like suffocation." The honesty in his words sliced through me more sharply than any lie ever could. I stood slowly, my voice shaking but steady enough to be heard. "So you decided to trade safety for excitement. A wife for a mistress, 11 years for 2. He reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said firmly. Behind him I saw movement, Vanessa standing in the doorway, her dress glowing in the sunlight. She looked confused, maybe frightened. For a moment, our eyes met. There was something almost apologetic in hers, like she wasn't fully aware of the wreckage she'd stepped into. Daniel turned, noticing her. "Vanessa, go inside," he said quickly, but she didn't move. "Who is she?" she asked. Her voice was calm, steady. "Daniel, who is she?" I took a deep breath, my pulse steady as I answered for him. "I'm his wife." The silence that followed could have cracked the air itself. Vanessa's eyes widened. The color drained from her face. Your wife?" She looked at Daniel, waiting for denial, for explanation, but he said nothing. His silence was its own confession. I turned then, not toward Daniel, but toward her. "I didn't come here to ruin your day," I said softly. "I just wanted the truth. I think now we both have it." She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. "I didn't know," she whispered. "He told me he was divorced." "Of course he did," I said. "That's what men like him do. They rewrite their lives to make room for the lies." Daniel stepped forward. "Jennifer, please." But I was done. "No, Daniel, you please explain to your fiancé why you still live with your divorced wife, why your toothbrush is still in my bathroom, why your name is still on my mortgage, and why your wedding suit came from the suitcase I packed for your business trip." He froze, speechless. Guests had begun to notice the scene unfolding near the garden. A few were peering out from the windows. Someone whispered. The string quartet had stopped playing. The world had tilted on its axis, and Daniel, always the composed, charming man, looked suddenly small. I could have stayed longer. I could have let the drama play out in full view of everyone. But that wasn't who I was. I didn't need to humiliate him. He was already unraveling on his own. I turned to leave, my heels crunching on the gravel path. "Jennifer," he called after me. "Please, can we talk later?" I stopped, just once, without turning around. "There's nothing left to say, Daniel. You already had your vows today." And with that, I walked away. The drive home was quiet. No music, no tears, just the sound of the tires against the road and the faint ringing in my ears. I kept replaying everything, the look on his face, Vanessa's shock, the absurdity of it all. When I pulled into our driveway, I sat in the car for a long time. The house looked the same neat lawn, flower pots by the porch, curtains half drawn. But it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a museum of a life that had already ended. Inside, I moved through the rooms slowly, touching things as if saying goodbye: the photo frames, the books, the worn throw blanket he always used. I reached the bedroom last. His side of the bed was perfectly made, untouched since Thursday. I sat down and let the silence settle around me. That's when the tears came. Quiet, heavy, unstoppable. They weren't loud or dramatic, just years of love, trust, and illusion dissolving into the pillow. By midnight, I was empty, completely hollow, but somewhere inside that emptiness, a small voice whispered, "Now you know the truth. What you do next is up to you." And I knew then that I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. I didn't sleep that night. The house was dark and the quiet felt heavier than ever, as if even the walls were holding their breath. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. Every sound seemed sharper, more deliberate. My mind kept circling the same questions. Why did he invite me? Was it deliberate? A mistake? A warning? None of the answers made sense. I had been faithful, patient, loving, and still. I was the one left standing alone. But grief has a strange rhythm. Once the tears run dry, something else takes its place: clarity. By sunrise, I knew exactly what I had to do. When Daniel finally came home 2 days later, it was late evening. I heard his car pull into the driveway, the crunch of tires on gravel. I stayed seated at the dining table, where I'd been waiting, a cup of untouched tea cooling in front of me. The door creaked open. His footsteps were slow, hesitant. "Jennifer?" I didn't answer. He walked into the kitchen, still in the same suit, only now wrinkled, the tie loosened, the confidence gone. His eyes were hollow, rimmed with exhaustion. He looked at me like a man searching for the right words to rebuild a house he'd burned down. "I didn't know where else to go," he said quietly. I took a slow breath, keeping my eyes on the teacup. Strange, you seem to have plenty of places to go last week. He sighed, dragging a hand down his face. It's over. The wedding, it didn't happen. I looked up then, my voice flat. Of course it didn't. He hesitated, then continued. Vanessa, she left. Walked out right after you did. Her parents were furious. It was a mess. I've been trying to call you since. I blocked your number, I said simply. He looked wounded, like the consequence had just caught up to the crime. Jen, please, can we talk? Talk? I repeated softly. Now you want to talk? You had 2 years to talk. You had every night beside me, every morning over coffee. Instead, you built another life and had the nerve to send me an invitation to its debut. He lowered his head. I didn't send it. That startled me. What? He shook his head slowly. It wasn't me. Vanessa must have done it. I never meant for you to find out that way. I leaned back, studying him. So let me get this straight. You plan to marry another woman while still married to me. But the real issue is that I found out the wrong way? He flinched at my tone. I know how it sounds. No, Daniel, I interrupted. You don't. You don't get to know how anything sounds anymore. You forfeit. Ted, that when you lied. Again and again, and called it love. He tried to reach for my hand. I pulled away. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said softly. Then why did you? He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His silence was my answer. That's when I stood up, calm, composed, deliberate. I packed a bag for you, I said. It's by the door. You'll find your clothes, your things, and your laptop. The rest stays here until the divorce is finalized. His eyes widened. Divorce? Yes, divorce, I said evenly. You made that choice the day you walked into that banquet hall. He took a shaky breath. Can't we at least talk about this? I'll get help. We can go to therapy. Therapy? I almost laughed. Daniel, therapy can't fix a man who plans a wedding behind his wife's back. He went quiet. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. For the first time, I saw him not as my husband, but as a coward, a man who ran from guilt by dressing it up as love. Please, he said softly, I know I can't undo what I did, but I need you to believe I never stopped caring. I met his eyes one last time. Daniel, caring without honesty isn't love, it's convenience. He stood there, motionless. Then, wordlessly, he walked to the door, picked up his bag, and left. The sound of the door clicking shut was the most peaceful sound I'd heard in weeks. That night, I opened the windows. The breeze carried in the scent of rain, sharp, clean, alive. I sat in silence and felt something I hadn't felt in years, space. For the next few days, I busied myself with small things. I returned to work, started sleeping in the guest room, and began sorting through the clutter that had filled our home, not just physical clutter, but emotional debris. Every drawer I emptied felt like removing a splinter that had been buried too long. One afternoon, I found the note I'd written him, the one I'd tucked into his suitcase before his trip. It was crumpled, unopened, lying among his shirts. My handwriting looked naive, almost childlike. Good luck, my love. Come home safe. I stared at it for a long time, then folded it carefully and placed it in my journal. Not as a reminder of pain, but as a marker of who I used to be, the woman who loved without question. A week later, Vanessa called. I recognized her voice, instantly low, steady, unsure. Jennifer, she began, I hope this isn't too much, but I needed to apologize. Her words were hesitant, trembling at the edges. I didn't know, truly. When I found out at the wedding when you said you were his wife, everything collapsed. He told me you were divorced. He said it was amicable. I closed my eyes. He's good at making lies sound reasonable. I should have seen it, she said, the small things. The way he avoided calls in the evenings, how he never let me meet his family. I wanted to believe him, so I didn't ask. Her voice broke. I'm so sorry, Jennifer. I never meant to take someone else's life. For a moment, I said nothing. Then I took a breath and answered quietly, You didn't take it, Vanessa. He gave it away. There was silence on the line, the kind of silence that carries both understanding and grief. Thank you, she whispered finally, for saying that. After we hung up, I sat for a while in the quiet, feeling a strange sense of peace. Not joy, not closure, just the soft stillness that comes after a storm. That night, I took a long walk. The neighborhood was quiet, the air cool against my skin. I passed by houses glowing with warm light, families gathered at dinner tables, laughter spilling through open windows. Once, that had been me, but I didn't envy it anymore. When I got home, I made a cup of tea and sat by the window. Outside, rain began to fall slow, rhythmic, cleansing. I watched the droplets gather on the glass, catching the reflection of my own face. I didn't see a broken woman. I saw someone new, someone who had walked through betrayal and found herself still standing. And for the first time in months, I whispered into the quiet, "You're safe now." It wasn't a promise to Daniel. It was a promise to myself. But peace, I learned, isn't the end of the story. Because people talk, and secrets, especially ones this loud, have a way of echoing through every corner of your life. The world was about to find out what Daniel had done. And for once, I didn't need to lift a finger. I used to think justice only came from courts or apologies. But that night, standing beneath the golden chandeliers of that reception hall, I learned that sometimes justice simply looks like truth being seen. The next morning, after the chaos of Daniel's wedding night, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Word had spread not through me, but through the guests who'd witnessed it all. The video of Daniel standing frozen as I held up his wedding invitation had made its way onto someone's social media. They captioned it, "The wife showed up." By noon, it had thousands of views. I didn't feel proud, just tired. My phone kept lighting up coworkers, family, even neighbors. My sister called first. "Jenny, is it true? He really married her?" I sighed, tried to. "But I think the bride's the only one left holding the bouquet." There was a pause, then a quiet laugh full of disbelief and heartbreak. "You always were too kind for him," she said softly. "Now everyone knows." For once that didn't hurt. Everyone knowing meant I didn't have to hide anymore. 2 days later, Daniel showed up at my doorstep. He looked nothing like the man I'd once fallen for. His eyes were sunken, his shirt wrinkled, his usual charm stripped away. The air between us was heavy with all the words we hadn't said. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice trembling slightly. I didn't open the door fully, just stood there, one hand on the frame. What could you possibly say that would make sense of what you did? He rubbed his temples. "It wasn't supposed to go that far. I thought she understood it was just for appearances. I never meant for it to become public." I let out a bitter laugh. "Appearances? Daniel, you stood at an altar. With a ring." He stepped closer. I panicked. "You don't know what it's like to feel trapped." That was it, that one word. "Trapped?" I interrupted, my voice firm but calm. "You weren't trapped, Daniel. You were married. You had a wife who loved you, who trusted you, who believed every time you said business trip. That wasn't a trap, that was a choice you made, over and over." He looked down, shoulders trembling. "I messed up." "No," I said quietly. "You destroyed something, but that's not my burden to carry anymore." He didn't argue, just stood there for a while, eyes red, like he finally saw the wreckage he'd made. Before he left, he said, almost in a whisper, "She called it off. Vanessa. She said she can't do this after the scene. Everyone's talking about it. I've lost everything." I looked at him, then really looked and realized how small he seemed, not just in guilt but in truth. I simply said, "Maybe now you'll understand what it feels like to lose what you took for granted." Then I closed the door. A week later, I returned to work. People didn't gossip to my face, but I could feel their sympathy in every softened smile and careful tone. My boss, Mrs. Carter, called me into her office. "I saw the clip," she said gently. "You handled yourself with dignity, Jennifer. That's not easy." It wasn't pride I felt. It was release, the kind that comes when you no longer need to explain your pain to anyone. At night, I sat on my porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the world move quietly. Across the street, the neighbors' kids laughed while their mother called them in for dinner. The sound filled the air, so ordinary, so steady, and I realized how long I'd lived waiting for peace to come from someone else's behavior. Peace, I learned, is something you take back for yourself. A few weeks later, an envelope arrived in the mail, Daniel's handwriting. Inside was a letter. Short, apologetic, full of the same kind of remorse people write when they're too late. He said H.E. was moving away, that he'd lost his job, his friends, and even the respect of his own family after the story spread. He wrote, "Maybe you'll never forgive me, but I hope one day you remember that I did love you. I just didn't know how to be worthy of it." I didn't cry. I folded the letter neatly, placed it in a drawer, and whispered, "You're right, you didn't." Then I walked to my vanity, looked in the mirror, and for the first time in months, didn't see a woman defined by someone else's choices. I saw someone who had walked through humiliation and come out whole, scarred, yes, but standing. In time, people stopped whispering. Life returned to its rhythm, slower, softer, cleaner. I sold the house Daniel and I had shared and moved into a small apartment overlooking the lake. The first night there, I sat by the window, watching the reflection of the city lights ripple on the water. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and rain like the first day we'd met. But this time, there was no ache, just quiet understanding. I whispered to myself, justice isn't always revenge. Sometimes it's just being able to breathe again, and that was enough. People talk about closure like it's a door you can just shut once the story's over. But real closure, it's more like learning to live with a door that doesn't quite close all the way. You stop trying to slam it, you just let the wind pass through. After Daniel left, silence became my companion. For a while it was loud. Every creak of the house, every ticking clock reminded me of the emptiness he left behind. But as weeks turned into months, that silence softened. It started to feel like peace. I began to notice small things again, the way sunlight poured through my kitchen window in the morning, how the air smelled like wet soil after rain, the way my own laughter sounded when my sister came over with her kids. It was as if life had been holding its breath, waiting for me to exhale. I remember one particular morning, maybe 2 months after everything, I woke up early and went for a walk by the lake. The water was still, perfectly mirroring the pale sky. I carried my coffee in a paper cup, the kind Daniel used to grab on his way to business trips. I smiled at the memory, not in bitterness, but in recognition of how far I'd come. I passed a group of older women doing Tai Chi near the benches. Their slow, synchronized movements looked peaceful, almost sacred. One of them caught my eye and smiled. "Join us," she said kindly. I shook my head at first, shy, but something inside me whispered, "Why not?" So I did. I set my coffee down and followed their gentle motions. For the first time in a long time, my body felt light, like I was moving without carrying the weight of what had been done to me. When the session ended, one of the women touched my arm and said, "You have a calm spirit. Keep walking toward it." That moment stayed with me. Back home, I started a small garden on my balcony, nothing fancy, just a few pots of herbs and flowers. I used to think Daniel and I would plant a garden together someday, but as I pressed seeds into the soil with my bare hands, I realized I didn't need we. I was enough. Each day, as tiny green shoots began to push through the soil, I felt something inside me doing the same. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It grows in fragments, in laughter with friends, in quiet dinners alone, in forgiving yourself for not seeing the signs sooner. One afternoon, Vanessa reached out. I didn't expect it. Her name flashing on my phone made my heart stop for a second. Her message was long, hesitant. She wrote, "I wanted to say sorry. I didn't know he was still married. When I found out, I ended it immediately. I was humiliated too. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say that. For a while, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to ignore her, but another part, the part that had been doing the slow work of healing, didn't want to carry bitterness anymore. So I replied simply, 'I hope you heal too.' That was it. No anger, no explanations, just release. Because forgiveness, I learned, isn't about saying what happened was okay. It's about saying I won't let it define me anymore. Life took new shape after that. I joined a community writing group, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. Sitting among strangers who shared their stories, I found my voice again. One night, I read a piece about betrayal, healing, and the quiet strength of moving on. When I finished, The room was silent, the kind of silence that means everyone felt something. A woman came up to me after and said, "That story, it sounded like you were talking about my life." I smiled and replied, "Maybe we've all had a business trip moment, something that taught us the cost of believing in the wrong person and the power of believing in ourselves again." Months passed, my balcony garden bloomed, I learned to sleep soundly again, and one morning, as I was making coffee, I realized I hadn't thought about Daniel in weeks. That realization didn't feel like triumph. It felt like peace. Later that year, I got a letter from the publishing group I joined. They wanted to feature one of my essays in their annual collection. It was titled "The Day I Received My Husband's Wedding Invitation." I laughed when I saw it, not because it was funny, but because it was proof that pain, when transformed, can become art. It can become meaning. It can even become light. On the day my piece was published, I stood by that same lake where I'd first joined the Tai Chi group. The air smelled of spring, fresh, forgiving. I whispered to myself, "You made it through." And in that quiet moment, I realized something Auntie May herself might say. Some people spend their lives chasing new beginnings, but the real miracle is surviving the endings. When I look back now, I don't see the night of that so-called wedding as the day my world ended. I see it as the day truth stepped out from the shadows and asked me, "Now that you know, who will you become?" For a long time, I thought love meant loyalty at all costs, that forgiveness meant pretending not to notice the cracks. But I was wrong. Love without honesty is just performance. And forgiveness, real forgiveness, starts with yourself. Sometimes the people we trust most will lie to us with a smile, and sometimes the universe will make sure the lie collapses in public, not to humiliate us, but to free us. Because once the truth is out, you can finally stop carrying what was never yours to bear. Daniel lost everything that night, his reputation, his pride, his illusion of control, but I gained something far more valuable: clarity. Clarity about who I was, what I deserved, and what kind of peace can grow even after betrayal burns everything to the ground. Now, when I pass by that hotel where it all unfolded, I don't flinch. I just breathe. The wound has turned into a scar, quiet, painless, and proof that I lived through it. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Justice isn't always punishment. Sometimes it's simply the chance to start over without the weight of someone else's lies. So if you're listening to my story tonight and you've been lied to, humiliated, left standing in a room full of people who didn't know your pain, remember this: the truth has a way of finding its light. It always does. Tell me, would you have shown up at that wedding, or would you have stayed silent and let the lie continue? I wonder which one would have brought you peace. Thank you for listening to my story. And if it touched your heart, stay a while. There are more stories here, stories about truth, strength, and the women who refuse to stay silent. Until next time, take care of your heart. And remember, sometimes the ending you didn't want is the freedom you always needed.